Hello, everyone. Welcome to our video on the Cancer new moon, which is happening. What's the date and time? Do you have it, Jenny?
I do. It's on June 28th. I believe it's at 10:52 p.m. That's correct. Eastern Daylight Time.
All right. And I think
Coming
it's
up.
at 7 degrees Cancer. I think that's right. So
Mhm,
we're
right.
we're just shortly, we've just gone into Cancer season within the last week or so. And here we
Mhm.
are at the new moon in Cancer. Now, before we talk about that, I want to say, please subscribe to our channel and
Mhm.
follow both Jenny and I on our different platforms. Below this video, you'll see all the information of how you can follow us. If you want to join the Patreon group, that would be great as well. Each month on the new moon, I do provide a document that kind of helps you really track it through your own chart. So check that out. That would be great. Yeah, and it's a great support to follow me on Patreon. So with that being said, now we're going to talk about the Cancer new moon. Let's talk about cycles.
Mhm.
Everything in astrology is cycles. We tend to think we live a linear life, we're born and we move forward and we die. But the reality is our lives are so cyclical. And one of the first ways to really start understanding that is to follow the cycles of the moon, which is really the relationship between the sun and the moon. That's what the phases of the moon are all created by that relationship between the two of them. And we can equate those phases and that cycle with the plant cycle. We can equate that with the cycle of everything in life. Everything follows the same cycle. So do you want to talk about the phases themselves real quickly, Jenny?
Sure. Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah. So basically, we're talking about the new moon. So that's the beginning of the cycle. The new moon is very much like planting that seed in the soil, which I think is especially appropriate when we're talking about Cancer, but we'll get more into that in a minute. And then we progress in the cycle a week later. You have the first quarter square. It's a sign, the part of the big growth phase. Another week later, and you're at the full moon. Which you see the full illumination of whatever you started at the beginning of the cycle. And then from there, we go back down to the waning last square. And that kind of starts shutting down the cycle and we kind of look back and reflect on the meaning of the cycle as a whole. And then we come all the way back through the balsamic phase, which is a very rich, important phase, going through the darkest part. And then we arrive back at the new moon. So today we're talking about new moon, so we're really talking about the beginning of a cycle, and really a wonderful opportunity to just think anew, think about something fresh, thinking about something you want to shift. As our lives continue at such a rapid pace, it's really nice just to kind of pause and think how we can apply the symbolism of astrology to our own lives and get a lot out of it. So
Yeah, so this is the planting of the seed. This is, yeah, it's sort of like a reset button. You can think of it every month. You kind of get a reset button and you can start thinking about where we are at in the cycles. Western astrology is built on the seasons, and Cancer season is the beginning of summer here in the northern hemisphere. So we're planting the seed for the summer.
yeah,
Yeah,
I love that.
yeah, planting the seed for the
Mhm.
summer. And Cancer, so I guess what we want to talk about now is Cancer. What is Cancer about? What
Oh.
is this that we're planting? What's the seed that we're planting?
Well, Cancer contains a lot because I mean, Cancer, as you said, is the beginning of the summer season, but Cancer really carries the archetype of the mother in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of stuff about feelings and emotions, and it's a water sign, so there's all the wateriness of those kinds of things. I always think about Cancer as being possibly the wellspring. So villages, started because there was a place that fresh water bubbled up from the soil. So it really carries all of this kind of starter energy, but it's this caring, nurturing, let's propagate the species type of energy. So it really carries that mother piece.
Yeah, one of the things that is really interesting about Cancer is, you know, in our culture, mothering and the feminine side of things is not highly respected often. And one of the ways I really see that in astrology is that people tend to think about Cancer as a weak sign. And Cancer is anything but a weak sign. Cancer is a cardinal sign. It's the beginning energy. It's very, very strong energy. And it's, you know, mothering, part of mothering is protection. You know, any animal that has a newborn baby is going to do anything within its power to protect that. And that is not a weakened position. It may be incredibly, intensely sensitive. It is not weak. I think that's such an important thing to remember with Cancer. Having raised having raised a daughter whose sun sign is Cancer, I learned that directly with her, because she's a very, very strong person.
Yeah, and I just think about, you know, it really does bring in these images, as you're talking about, of giving birth. And giving birth is anything but an easy process. I mean, as many of you watching this maybe have given birth, and it's intense. I mean, it's the start of life, and it is nothing less than that. And so to underestimate Cancer, to miss its point, you're really missing out on a lot, because that mother energy really is why we're all here, you know. So that's really what we're working with today.
Yep. Without Cancer energy, none of us would have emerged into this world. So, there's an incredible strength and power in that.
Yeah, and the other thing I just want to mention, and then we'll open up the chart, is that Cancer is associated with the moon. So the moon rules the sign of Cancer in astrology. And so that moon is really a big symbol for each and every one of us for what our emotional content is. What is the driving need that motivates all of us? You know, what is that kind of that need material? So this new moon in Cancer for all of us is going to have some personal impact with, because each of our own moons rules that area of life. And we'll get into that at the end, but I really just want to mention that the moon and Cancer are very tightly entwined. So extra important.
All right. Well, let's take a quick look at the chart, and then we'll go right into the individual impacts. But starting here, okay. So here we have, we can see here's the sun and moon at 7 degrees of Cancer. There they are. And so how are these two in their union here at this new point? How are they interacting with the other planets? That's the thing we really want to pay attention to here. And we've got one point that's really significant here, and that is a square to Jupiter.
Yeah, so, you know, what we're seeing, we've talked about Cancer and what the new moon means. And so this is really a time to plant a seed for nurturing yourself, for working with the sensitivities in your chart. And when you see that square from Jupiter in the sign of Aries, it kind of just highlights the idea that this is a really good opportunity to confront some of that inner content that perhaps holds you back. It's a really, really good time to do that. And why are we doing it? In the name of our own autonomy, in the name of ourselves, to be able to stand tall and do the things that we need to do in this world.
Yeah, there's with that Jupiter in Aries squaring the sun and moon, you know, Aries is also a cardinal sign. That's, you know, a square aspect is going to be between two signs, generally speaking, that are of the same modality. So these are both very strong signs, and Jupiter's job is to expand things. So this is really expanding the need to plant that seed, the need to be to really courageously take on the protection or the nurturance that is necessary at this time. It's not a wimpy process. It's a process that really takes a lot of courage.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, you know, this really has to do with The Cancer stuff pertains to something that's more inward, that's tucked away, that's personal, that's emotional, that may be tied up in our past, that may be tied up with some kinds of emotional wounds and emotional triggers. And that's a process of knowing yourself. And then the Jupiter and Aries brings in the whole, okay, and now you have to interact with the rest of the world. You know, you still have to have an external life. You still have to be able to express yourself outwardly and socialize and talk to people and have these outward relationships. So in a lot of ways, this is describing some of the tension between the inner work and then the outer need to express those energies as well. So that's a little bit of what we're working with today. And in a square, it brings up this idea that there's some tension, there's maybe some conflict, but there's also huge potential for growth.
Yeah. And even, you know, the tension and conflict is expansive. So it's interesting too. One of the things, the first thing that I really thought that came to me when I looked at this chart itself is that over the last few weeks since the full moon, that moon itself has gone over all of the planets. And so it's kind of it's sort of coming into the relationship with the sun with a very full, its emotional coffers are full.
Yeah.
Very, very full. And it's coming up here and it's really sensitive and it's, you know, laying down like, okay, we're going to plant this seed. And the one thing that's kind of, you know, pulling it back is that necessity to, you know, it's not easy to take that action, to step into the courage necessary. It's like there's really courage necessary to plant this seed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of pressure, I think, to not deal with our own emotional stuff. You know, there's a lot of pressure just to say, oh, forget it and just move on. And it's not that you want to hang out in it and wallow. It's more that you want to recognize and accept and let it be part of your overall, you know, who you are as a person in totality and live your life from that conscious place. I mean, that's really what we're looking at. It's not, you know, it's not walking back in the past and getting stuck in it. It's not that at all. It's more accepting it so that you can, the avenue before you widens, you know, and you can step forth on that path.
I like that. So, the avenue before you widen. Okay. So plant the seed. Keep in mind that the courage it takes to plant that seed is going to expand the path. I like that, thinking about it that way. Anything else, or are we ready to jump right into the particular rising signs?
The only other thing I'll add is just bear in mind that in 2 weeks we'll have the full moon. So on July 13th, you will see the fruits of your labors of whatever seeds you plant. And also if you're using the bigger, the year-long cycle, January 6th will be the full moon in Cancer. So that gives you 2 different timeframes to work with.
Right. The 2 week time frame is pretty quick to see a result, but in certain circumstances, you will, you know, you might plant a seed to move and in 2 weeks you've done it, you know, whatever it is. On the other hand, pay attention to and really understand that the seed you're planting today, really in 6 months, the full illumination of that will be clear. So on that,
I'm going to stop sharing so we can move on.
And then we're going to open this. And what I've included here is just the sun and the moon and Jupiter. Those are the things that we want to pay attention to. So if you have Aries rising, this is going to put that new moon right in your 4th house. And, you know, anyone with Aries rising has an incredible amount of sensitivity and old instinctual stuff in that 4th house of home and family, right? So the seed you're planting is to really expand your understanding of that sensitivity, to plant a seed to protect yourself, your family, to really work with those inner family dynamic sensitivities that you have.
Yeah. And I think that's well put, Laurie. I mean, we're sort of talking about 2 avenues in a way, to use that word avenue again, but where on one hand, You're working to really nurture your family as is right now. And then the sort of the sub layer is what are, wounds you may have sustained from your own upbringing, and how can you address those right now? And in addressing those, you're going to step into that place of autonomy that the Jupiter and Aries represents. So now is a great time with that square to have the courage to confront those things.
Right. So to plant that seed, to plant the seed of, understanding your own sensitivity, maybe to plant that seed, you have to really be courageous in the expansion of yourself, your self-expression.
Yeah. So this might be, something like, as you're focusing your nurturing attention on your family, just noticing what is coming up for you in your emotional field. What work is asking for your attention? Or
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So courageously put it out there and plant that seed to develop more understanding and sensitivity in that area. Okay. Now, if you have Taurus rising, let's see here. We are going to make that go away. All right. If you have Taurus rising, the new moon is going to fall here in your third house. The third house is, it's your kind of your immediate environment. It represents your immediate environment. It also represents communication, how you communicate. It can often represent siblings for some people. So really giving some deep thought and understanding to why and how, what is that sensitivity for you? What is that early sensitivity around your environment or siblings or communication?
Yeah. And then how is this impacting your communication now? With this, this could be a fairly volatile way of communicating, where you're kind of putting some real emotional zingers into the way that you talk. And so really the consciousness you're trying to bring here is to make that link between what's your inner emotional content and how are you talking to the people around you. And that's what you're looking at. And I think with that square from Jupiter and Aries, there's a lot of heat kind of tucked away behind the scenes for anyone with Taurus rising. That Aries is tucked away. So I think there's an extra special need to think about bringing more light of consciousness to these issues, because I think this could be something where your communication can be really intense for other people and you're not aware of it yet. So it's going to really help you to start tuning into that.
Yeah. And if if you know your chart, if you understand this language, your own personal moon and where it is, what sign it's in, is going to really tell you a lot about how you do communicate and how some of those things play out. But yeah, so planting a seed to really understand your communication style, how you manage some of those issues around your immediate environment and your siblings, and really having the courage to look into your own unconscious in order to understand what the seed is you're planting there.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I like that you brought in the reminder just about understanding where your own moon is, just that is really going to help you flesh out the picture. You've kind of got half the story here with knowing that your moon rules that third house of communication, and it would be really great to know the other half.
Because if your moon rules the third house, you might think, if you've got Cancer here, you might think, oh, well, all my communications are sensitive, right? Well, maybe, but remember also it's a cardinal sign. So it's not, it's not as quiet as you might expect, but also it depends so much on where your moon is. If your moon is in Sagittarius, your communication style is going to be very different than if your moon is in Virgo.
Yeah.
That's going to tell you a lot about that area. All right. Next, are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay. That go away. And now, if you have Gemini rising, we are looking at the new moon falling here in your second house. I think about the second house as, there's sort of two sides to the second house in the way I think about it. I think of the second house as, the traditional idea of thinking about it as money and resources. And then it's also has so much to do with how we value ourselves, our own self-worth.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
with Cancer in that area, this is a really sensitive area for you.
Mhm.
And it's very important that you protect your self-worth and your understanding of your self-worth. And
Mhm.
this is where you're planting a seed this month.
Yeah. Yeah, I think anyone with the Cancer in the second house here, so Gemini rising, I mean, you really are going to have to have a reckoning with your vulnerabilities, because if you
Right.
don't,
Thank
it
you.
really leads you to a sort of a hole, that you are looking outside of yourself to fill. Whereas the real question is, how do you do that for yourself? How do you value yourself, lift yourself up? I mean, this isn't all entirely alone, but in just looking at this one part of it. So it's very important that you both look at how you work with your emotions now, and then what kinds of woundings from your past might have led to this low self-esteem state, and how can you offer yourself that self-love that's going to help you heal through that area. And that is a crucial question for somebody with
Yes.
Gemini rising.
And
So,
with the way this is set up, we've got Jupiter here pushing us to, ask those questions. Where do I need to be courageous in order to plant that seed sufficiently? Well, we've got to be courageous in the area of our community. There's some action to be taken to expand our community and how we receive love from community in order to support that vulnerability of our own self-worth.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like how you brought it up that way, Lori, because what we're really doing is linking the idea that however you feel in your groups, in your community, like whatever those feelings are, is very much tied into how you feel about yourself and your self-worth. So as you feel more healed and more grounded in that area of self-worth, the more you're able to stand up and be that leader that you're really being called to be in community. And that's what the link is. And they really work together, because you also are receiving, as you said, love from the community. So the more you're able to work with this process, the more you are empowered to do the things you're here to do in front of groups.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So plant that seed. It's really all about understanding your own self-worth.
Yeah.
It's
And yeah, it's that you got it.
anything else? I just want to say again with this one, look to your own moon as well. What
Exactly.
sign
Yeah.
is your moon in? Because your
Mhm.
moon is probably not here in Cancer, but with Cancer on the second house, how you approach your own self-worth is going to be determined an awfully lot by your own personal moon in your chart.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up, Lori, because that was the only thing I wanted to add too, is just that moon rulership. Because the other half of this equation, for those of you listening to this, is whatever sign your moon in is telling you what sorts of activities do you need to do in order to work with the emotional content tied in with self-worth. I mean, it's very linked together, and it's very useful information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And during Cancer season, all of us, our natal moons and the transiting moon, everything around the moon during Cancer season is heightened.
Yeah. So it's a great opportunity.
It's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
The area that Cancer holds in your chart is so important right now. And plant that seed and nurture it. And you've got to take some courageous push in the area of community in order to do that.
Mhm.
All right. We ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's make that go away. And now let's moving on to those of you with Cancer rising. This creates this new moon is such a personal thing for you. The
Mhm.
Cancer new moon that the seed that you're planting is around your own personality. how you show up in the world, how you express yourself. And you've got a lot of sensitivity here. Whoever
Yeah.
you are, if you've got Cancer rising, you're incredibly vulnerable to your own understanding of how you express yourself in the world.
Yeah. I would think about sometimes that the rising sign, in a way, it's sort of like a gateway. It's where sort of everything comes into you and everything goes out in a way. So with Cancer rising, like you are hyper tuned in to other people's emotions all the time. So it's very, very important that you develop a keen sense of self-awareness and that you really tune in to your feelings and have an understanding of them so that you can kind of nurture and protect yourself as you move about the world. But you don't want to go so far into that protection that you're cut off. So it's a dance, and it's a dance that happens on a daily basis. And the more that you're comfortable in your own skin, which is kind of what the ascendant's talking about, the more you're going to be able to do that and walk gracefully through your life with a real sense of empathy that we need.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So that's the seed you're planting, to develop that understanding of the self and the self-expression, and plant that seed to love yourself more, to protect your own understanding of yourself. And that brings us into, okay, what's the other piece here? The other piece is, in order at this new moon to plant this seed, you're really having to contend with the need to really courageously be taking action and pushing forward in your career. I wonder, this just reminds me of somebody I know.
Yes, Laurie. Yeah, I mean, I think this chart in particular does really speak to that inward process of whatever you're doing to work with both the old emotional detritus and wounding that kind of holds you back and keeps you in a child state, that past piece, plus the how are you emotionally right now as you navigate your world, and then the external thing of, okay, we'll get to work. So you're doing all that difficult inner work, but you're also showing up to your profession and getting the job done, and being brave and autonomous in how you're doing that.
Yeah, wherever Cancer is in your chart, you have this instinctual childhood need that can be really challenging. So here, I also want to say that how this works for you is really dependent in large part also on your personal moon, because how that sensitivity works for you is going to be very different if your personal moon is in Scorpio or if it's in Aquarius. It's going to be a very different story. But regardless of where your moon is, that sensitivity is around how you express yourself.
Yeah, and it's knowing your natal moon is going to help you understand what kinds of things, what area of your life do you need to focus on in order to nurture the emotional content. I mean, that's what you're going to need to look at. And also, anyone with Cancer rising, your moon rules your chart. It's the chart ruler in a lot of ways. So it's extra important. Not only are you looking at the sensitivity because you're Cancer rising, but you're also looking at the simple fact that your moon is a very prominent planet. And so it is extra part of your path to really engage with and nurture that emotional content. It's very important.
And this period of time, when the sun is moving through Cancer, you are so sensitive around that area of, who you are, how you show up, how people see you.
Yeah. So I also think everybody with Cancer rising should just go on vacation during Cancer month. And luckily for me, I'm Cancer rising and I am going on vacation. So, but I was just thinking it is a really good time to just unplug, just take a break. So
unplug, take a break. And at the same time, you are courageously pushing some action forward too, which that does not take away the vacation.
Right. It means set it all up to schedule it out.
Exactly. Set it up to schedule it out. Make sure before you go on vacation, you've got your web designer doing what needs to be done, or, whatever it is. have things scheduled and then go on vacation and enjoy that nurturing of the self. Plant that seed to grow into an ability to really understand and love your own vulnerability and allow it to be seen.
Nice.
I like that.
Lovely.
That's awesome.
Good.
Okay, now let's move on to those of you with Leo rising. And this puts that really tender spot in the 12th house.
Yeah.
So the seed you're planting is a seed of deep understanding of what is hidden.
That's right. I was just thinking, Leo, such a gregarious sign. So those of you with Leo rising, you're really carrying that, I don't know, that archetype of the performer, this very external gregarious personality, even if you yourself are a very shy person, which I've seen that quite a bit actually with Leo rising. But it means that emotional content, it's in a difficult place to get to. So I kind of think of how those work together, like Leo kind of performing and blustering and maybe not being that sure about what the emotional content is because it's so hidden away. It's not easy to get at. So I feel like it requires quite a bit of willingness to delve into those less conscious places or very unconscious places really that the 12th house symbolizes.
Yeah.
So, and I do, people I know with this, have talked about that, the difficulty of getting to understand their own emotional components because it's so tucked away. And
well, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Leo,
totally.
like you said, you're out there in a way. Obviously that depends on where the sun is because the sun rules that Leo rising. But it's hidden away here. So the seed that you're planting is to go deep, and you can think of all kinds of things that you could do to plant that seed. You could make an appointment with a therapist. You could pick up a book that helps you dig deep. You could make an appointment with an astrologer. There are many things you could do to really start the process, plant the seed of deep unconscious understanding, peeling away that skin of the onion, so to speak, of what's hidden there beneath the surface.
Yeah, and I mean, it could be some of the other actions might be like going on a retreat, but it also could just be selfless service, which is something you can do in an instant, an act of kindness. So these are things, there's lots of accessible ways to do it.
Right. And then with the square aspect to Jupiter being in the 9th house, it's like, okay, what is pushing you here is the courage of really maybe changing your worldview in some way, learning something that's going to really allow you to go into those vulnerable, hidden places. I like that. That combination. That's a nice way to think about that, because in order to go in here and plant that seed and do that inner work, you have to allow yourself to. You have to have the courage to understand that could make a difference to you.
Yeah. And I mean, with Jupiter and Aries too, in that 9th house, I just think about, seeking out a teacher, seeking out maybe the meditation, the teacher you need. That's a very active kind of thing of like doing some research, talking to some people, and then doing the inner work of trying to, what do I really need as I seek that teacher? And that's kind of how I see the kind of the inner and the outer working here. Because this is a very, think about the 9th and the 12th house together. There's a lot of learning that's happening between those two. They're part of that, the 4 cadent houses, and the other ones being the 3rd and the 6th. And the 9th and the 12th really deal with the pursuit of learning kind of in the outside world, like the teachers that you find and the experiences as you engage with things like other people's suffering as well, which is a 12th house thing. So there's a lot about those types of learning topics here.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to go on to the next one?
Let's just mention the moon rulership real quick.
Oh yeah.
And then yes. This is just the idea that, you've got half of the equation here by looking at trying to get into that, what is that emotional content and suffering that you're wrestling with here? But the other question is, where is your natal moon? Because your natal moon's going to shed some light on what activities you need to do to satisfy that. And it's going to be very different depending what sign it's in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the more you know about your own chart, the more this stuff kind of opens up your understanding of how to work with these cycles. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next one. Okay, so now we have come to Virgo rising. And so for those of you with Virgo rising, this puts the new moon in your 11th house. Okay, so we know right away that if you've got Virgo rising, you've got a lot of sensitivity in that 11th house. The 11th house, we tend to think of as community, not your best friends, but sort of the people that support you. One of the ways I think about the 11th house is it's where we receive love and support from a larger community of like-minded people.
Yeah.
Anything else about, what do you think about the 11th house itself?
I also feel like, that sensitivity that, it's came from a younger place, the origins of it. So something about like, how was your community playing out for you when you were younger, when you were a child? Like, where does that sensitivity come from? And then the big question is, well, what do you do about it now? Like, how do you nurture and soothe yourself so that you may show up in these group situations and let your community support you and love you and hold you up? I mean, that's really the question we're looking at. And then when you bring in that challenge of the square, here we have Jupiter in Aries in your 8th house. And boy, that's a tough spot for Jupiter Aries. I mean, the 8th house, you're really having to deal with other people's stuff, like other people's baggage, as we talk about a lot, other people's values, the way that other people like to push on you and expect you to behave in a certain way. And your job here is to say, no, I have my boundaries and I'm me, and I'm going to do the things I need to do for you. I'm going to be in a relationship with you, but I'm not going to sort of be prodded and told what to do, especially not with Aries there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the new moon is really asking that you plant a seed to kind of look at and grow yourself in that area of community, to really understand what your needs are there. What do you need to feel safe and secure and loved within the context of community? And how do you need to, where's the courage to put the boundaries into your personal relationships to support the growing, nurturing community?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Jupiter represents growth in a lot of ways. It's like, where do you need to grow in order to, it's like you're working with the nurturing part in groups, and then how is it going to allow you to grow in how you deal with other people? I guess that's how I want to say it. How, what is the growth potential for you so that you can have good boundaries? And good boundaries, these are not walls, and neither are they a little tiny thread. They're more of a, I like to think of it as a semi-permeable membrane, which is what surrounds cell walls in all of the cells in our bodies. So the idea that some things can come across and some things can't, but you get to decide. It's up to you to decide what those boundaries are going to be and when you're going to exit a situation that isn't working for you. And it's those kinds of decisions. So
yeah, boundaries are so interesting because people have different ideas of what that actually means. And the 8th house is so much around, other people's stuff and how we hold our boundaries to support us in the face of other people's stuff, so to speak. And yeah, it's not rules or laws that we set up that other people have to follow. It's, the expectations, the courage to do what we have to do for ourselves. So there's some way for those of you with Virgo rising that courageously setting boundaries can really support that need to plant a seed of a supportive community for yourself.
Mhm. Oh, kitten.
Oh, a kitten. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit of a distraction, but
That's okay.
normally I keep him, away, but he was a little too needy. He was a little too needy. It must be something about this Cancer new moon coming up that
That's
he's a
right.
little needy. I don't have his birth chart. It's a very sad reality.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other
Okay.
thing that we did want to say here is that, yeah, there's kind of two parts to this. And we know that if you've got Virgo rising, there's an incredible sensitivity there around how community uplifts you, supports you, and loves you. But it also, you need to know where your own moon is to give you more understanding of what the fuller picture is for you on an
Mhm.
individual level. Your community and your attachment and your needs around that area are going to be very different if your moon is in Aries or if your moon is in Capricorn.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's going to really tell you a lot more about what that need is, which will support
Mhm.
you in understanding exactly what the seed is you need to plant.
Exactly.
Right,
Great.
right. Okay, so
Okay.
now we are ready to move on to those of you with Libra rising.
That's right.
Let's see.
There it
Okay,
is. Look at that.
so if you have Libra rising, this means that the seed you're planting this month at this new moon is in your 10th house. So this tells us you've got a lot of sensitivity and probably some old stories of where that sensitivity came from around your career, your reputation, how you show up in the world.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, this presents somewhat of an interesting anomaly because the 10th house is kind of your most public place in the chart. And to have this sensitivity there, it kind of implies it's sort of a two-way street that you might be in a profession where you're taking care of and nurturing other people. And if that's true, the question is going to be, how are you taking care of yourself while you're doing all this caring for other people? Um, you know, uh, on the other hand, it might be, as Laurie, you're suggesting too, just that whole, this is a very sensitive area, so you might be very volatile at work. You might find work challenging or difficult for you, and in a way the question still becomes, how are you taking care of you? So it's kind of can play out in a couple of those different scenarios,
Yeah.
depending what your life is like.
Yeah.
um,
And depending on what
yeah,
your personal moon is,
exactly.
because with
Yeah.
Cancer up there in the 10th house, we know that something around protection or care or nurturing is going to, be part of your vocation or how you're seen in the world. But that's going to be very different if your moon is in whatever. If your moon is in Virgo, it'll be a lot different than if your moon is in Aquarius.
Yeah.
So, knowing that is going to help you understand what you need in this area. So it'll help you understand the seed that you need to plant there.
Yeah, and also a worthy question will be, what is the source of that sort of volatility or that unhealed place, and looking further back into your roots so that you can establish a better root system, so that when you go to work, you're not dealing with the triggers in the same way, or you're able to nurture people if that's part of your profession. So there's something about that, like chasing that up a little bit into the past. So,
And then
and
where
then,
the stress is coming from, or where you need to really show courage in planting this seed, comes from the area of an intimate partner, or it could certainly be a co-worker or a business partner. But there's some courage that needs to be taken in relationship in order to really support the understanding of that sensitivity and
mm.
depth and vulnerability in the career.
Yeah, so it might be this might play out as that kind of classic struggle between trying to spend enough time with maybe your newer partner and then also giving work what it needs. And there's kind of there certainly can be a struggle here. And here with Jupiter and Aries, it's something about you having to kind of claim your autonomy in your relationship, yet still hold the ability to cooperate because it is the seventh house. So you want to keep the partnership. You're going to work with those two dynamics to make that work, and then take care of what you need to take care of in your workplace. So
absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So plant the seed, take into consideration the courage that you have to work with other people around as well as you plant that seed, and then watch how it unfolds over the next 2 weeks and the next 6 months.
All right.
Okay. So now let's move on to those of you who have Scorpio rising, and that's going to put your new moon in the 9th house. So we're planting a seed here in the 9th house. The 9th house is really the house of expanded understanding. You can think of that 9th house as education or travel or just our worldview. So thinking about, why is that such a sensitive area for you? What's the underlying vulnerability in this area?
Yeah, and I think too with Scorpio rising, so that intense focus with the Scorpio kind of underworld that you need to do. I think what this is also saying is that if you're willing to take that journey to go inward, it's a tremendous source of wisdom. I mean, as you have an understanding of your own vulnerability, of your own like old things that need to be healed and worked through, it's just going to provide you with this, really expanded worldview of other people's issues as well. So, I mean, there's tremendous things to be harvested, from this process if you're willing to do that. So I think that's part of it as well.
So it's, one of the things that we've been talking about with each of these rising signs is also kind of the flip side. Like, we've got Cancer here, so we know there's a deep vulnerability in that area for you that comes from the past that you really need to understand. And yet that storyline attached to that is going to be very dependent on the sign that your personal moon is in. It's going to be very different. Your vulnerability to your worldview or to understanding growth and expansion, it's going to be very different if your moon's in Taurus or if it's in Pisces. It's going to be a very different story.
Yeah, it adds a totally different dimension. So really important to know. And then also, of course, we have that square from Jupiter and Aries that we've been talking about here. Yes. So for those of you with Scorpio rising, that's in the 6th house of routines. So there's some way that perhaps you need to expand your routine to support your health. Those are 6th house things.
Yeah, and there's going to be some courage involved in it. Could be something around your health care, or there could be some health issue involved. Something about your routines. Pet. Maybe you just got a really annoying pet, a really adorable pet, but sometimes it takes courage to deal with it.
I mean, the 6th house can also be like kind of training. So it's like getting hands-on training, like practical training in order to expand your knowledge through that 9th house. So there's something in which you need to reckon with that emotional content so that you can courageously engage in that training program.
I like that you brought that up. Yeah, an apprenticeship program or something that really can, as you approach it, it can really support and push you to plant that seed of growing your worldview, understanding. As you go through an apprenticeship program, it's changing you. That's interesting. Okay, are we ready to move on?
Good. Yes, I think we've covered the topics here.
Okay, so now we're going to go to those of you with Sagittarius rising. This is going to put the new moon here in your 8th house. So you are planting a seed to kind of learn how to grapple with other people's stuff, other people's baggage. That's how I think of the 8th house. There's many ways. Astrology is a symbolic language. There's layers and layers of meaning to everything. with the eighth house, it really is about how we approach and grapple with the values of other people,
Yeah.
other people's money, other people's resources. You know, the old time astrologers called it the house of sex, death, and taxes.
Yeah.
And if you think about that, all of those things really involve us learning how to grapple with other people's stuff.
Yeah. And I think, with Sagittarius rising, a key skill that you're going to need to gain is how to understand where your emotional content ends and where other people's begins. Like, this is going to require quite a bit of self-awareness of your own emotional content so that you can be in those places, so you can not just have your face triggered off by people, because that's what's happening. That unhealed emotional content, when it gets triggered, I mean, it plays off as, oh my God, I'm so frustrated with everybody. And, the desire to blame people around you. But the reality is you just haven't been able to work with that content to that level. And so whenever somebody triggers you, especially a Sagittarius rising, think of it as a signpost for something that needs your attention, where you need to go in and do a bit of your own inner healing work, take a time out, take a pause, take a little mini retreat, whatever it is you need to do to get space, because that's what's really happening. And then as you gain that, it kind of brings us to that Jupiter and Aries square, which is sort of saying, as you do that and you liberate yourself from your reactivity, you're able to give more freely of love without being concerned. You can be more unconditional with your love.
I love how you just brought that together. That makes so much sense to me. Yeah, the courage to show love will really support your understanding and facing your own vulnerability when you get you get triggered by people, and you can really learn how to allow yourself to be vulnerable there without getting triggered.
Exactly.
And it really comes from the courage of allowing yourself to learn how to love instead of being stuck in your own stuff. Oh, I like that. Yeah, that's really interesting.
And it does take a lot of courage, right? I mean, goodness, like, it takes courage to confront whatever those old things are, so that you can accept them and release them and, be empowered. Yeah. That's what really we're talking about.
Absolutely.
I guess, go ahead.
No,
I know
you
what you're
go
going to say.
ahead. You go ahead.
I think what we're both probably going to say is the other piece here is knowing where your own natal moon is, because whatever sign and house your own natal moon in is it's going to flesh out the story of, whatever it is that you need to nurture. It's going to let you know what kinds of activities do you need to really honor and respect whatever that moon sign is in. Right. So that really helps if you know that.
Yeah. Whatever sign your moon is in is going to greatly impact how you manage yourself when you get triggered by other people.
You got
my
it.
God, my kitten is tied up in my sorry about this, folks. I had him closed away, but then the neighbors were making so much noise he got scared. So I let him out, and now there's a big distraction here. But I think we've covered that. Yeah, really understanding where your own moon is going to tell you a lot about how you manage yourself in the face of other people. And that will give you a lot more information on what seed to plant here. Yeah. What is it you really need to begin on this new cycle? Okay, so we're going to make that go away. Oh, geez, that's not what I meant to do. I apologize. We'll get right back there. Now we're going on to Capricorn rising. So if you have Capricorn rising, this is going to put the new moon itself right in your 7th house. So you're starting a new cycle that involves planting a seed regarding intimate equal partnership.
That's right. I mean, I think, anyone with Cancer in the 7th house, there's a great deal of sensitivity around partnerships. It's plain as simple. I mean, it might be your intimate partners. It could be business partners. Doesn't really matter. The thing that you need to know is that there's a sensitivity here. And some of the questions to ask are to look back your past? Like, what are some unhealed wounds to do with partnership? You know, is there a fear of commitment? Is it something you saw in your home life? You know, all of those kinds of stories, and just recognize the empowerment that's available when you have a greater understanding of those things, so that you can, you know, have satisfying partnerships. Because the truth is, with Capricorn rising, when you are ready for that intimate partnership, you know, you're going to go all in, because this is your emotional content. I mean, this is a profound placement to have Cancer. So it's important, you know, you've got to have a relationship with yourself. You've got to have a relationship with your own inner content in order to be fully present and available in a partnership. It's the bottom line.
Absolutely. So as you're planting that seed, as you're thinking about, what exactly your desire to grow, this ability to be really tender and vulnerable and grow a healthy partnership, you're faced at this time with the need to courageously bring something in from the home and family. How do you see that, Jennie?
Well, the fourth house is also like the roots of your own personality. So there's something about needing to be courageous in standing up, like establishing your own roots in order to meet this very vulnerable content in partnerships. So something about having to, you know, take that fierce, courageous action to stand on your own 2 feet. And that might involve having to clear something from your home life, your past, you know, that if that ground was not stable, which, I mean, it isn't for most of us, right? You know, it is, I mean, it's just work you have to do. There's sort of it's like there's parts of yourself you have to self-parent. And that's very clear with this Capricorn rising, that you've got to do that kind of, how do you lift yourself up with courage and the fire of Aries in order to embrace the vulnerability you feel in partnerships.
Yeah, so that kind of, that piece that's kind of holding back or insisting on some effort could involve, like you said, it could involve really working with those deep inner parts of self. It could also have to do with your house itself, or the family that you live with, or your parents, or your childhood home. So there's different layers that this could be playing out on. But there's something in that has to be courageously kind of worked with in order to plant the seed that's going to enable you to grow that tender relationship. The other thing that we want to mention is that what your needs are, what your sensitivity and tender vulnerability in relationship is going to be really colored by the sign and placement of your natal moon. If your moon is in Leo, you're going to have a very different kind of sensitivity to your relationships than if your moon is in Scorpio, as an example. Anything, whatever sign your moon is in, is going to really speak to what the sensitivity is. And that will help you understand the seed to be planted there.
Yeah, well said. Great.
Okay. All right. So now we are going to go on to those of you with Aquarius rising. If you've got Aquarius rising, this new moon is happening right here in your 6th house. It's really about planting a seed to nurture your routines, your health, how you function on a day-to-day level, which is an area where you are incredibly sensitive.
Yeah. I mean, if you have this placement, it's really, really important that you have some fairly solid routines around your balance of solitude and social time, and other things too. But that's really going to be like, you need time for inward contemplation with this placement. You need something solo that really fills you up and nourishes you, gives you space to reflect on whatever emotional baggage you have from the past that needs to be sort of nurtured and parented and all of those things. So that's going to be a key question with this, is that you have you have routines that allow you, it's kind of like you need a container, right? You need a cup to hold the water. So you need a container to hold all that Cancer so that you're able to work with it in a way that works for you.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
that's what you're planting a seed around, is around really nurturing yourself through your routines.
Mhm.
And the piece that's kind of pushing that needs to be managed here is this courage of, I'd say, in the third house, your voice.
Mm.
There's
Mhm.
something you need to say.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like a little bit of I was thinking too, it's almost like coordinating. There's a little bit of coordinating that needs to happen. Like you might need to communicate with some people to be partners in crime through your routines and so on. And then other times it's just going to be like, well, I got to go do this other thing. I need to tell you and draw a verbal boundary with you that I got to go and do this other thing and take care of yourself that way. So there's something about that, but it takes a lot of courage to do that. It takes courage to really speak what you think needs to be spoken, and in the name of allowing yourself this space.
Yeah. So there's
So,
one other
yeah.
thing that we want to
Mhm.
mention, and that is that with this being the Cancer new moon, the other side to pay attention to is, where is your natal moon? If
Mhm.
your natal moon is, depending on what sign your natal moon is in, that's going to really tell you a lot about what that vulnerability is and
Mhm.
how to plant that seed.
Mhm.
Your natal moon is
Yeah.
in Leo, it's going to be a very different story than if your natal moon is in Virgo. Your needs on that level of routines, healthcare
Mhm.
are going to be very different.
Yeah. Yeah. And that need really is, kind of a very motivating need in your chart that you're really working to get that need met. So the more that you can turn and face that and work with it and honor it and respect it and know what it is, the more you're going to mature, through your life.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to move to those of you with Pisces rising. Get this. All right. So if you have Pisces rising, this new moon is falling right here in your fifth house. This is where you're going to be planting a seed of vulnerability, a seed to grow in understanding your sensitivity. Fifth house is about where you give love,
Hmm. Yeah.
where
So
you really give of yourself. Yeah.
yeah, I in a lot of ways I feel like this Pisces rising chart, it's quite simple. It's sort of like when you feel nourished, you're able to nourish others. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what the fifth house of giving love. So this really is, in a way, this is how you, if you have children, how you care for your children. You've got to care for yourself and work with your own emotional content in order to really give that unconditional mothering support to children, to the children that you have. So that can also, if you don't have children, that could be your creative projects, the things that you really are love to do, you joyfully give of yourself, and that's part of what this equation is for Pisces rising.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you've got Pisces rising, that is such a sensitive area. How
Mhm.
you give love is when you give love in your life, whether it be to children, to your own creative process, to love affairs, you're very vulnerable there.
Mhm.
So this is a time to really consider that vulnerability and plant a seed to develop that vulnerability in a way that it really supports and nurtures you and others.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and then we want to just notice that the kind of the pushback here, the place that really insists we have to take some action, is in this area of the second house, which is so much about our self-worth,
Hmm.
self-esteem.
Yeah.
So there's some way that in planting this seed, you have to face the courage of really expanding your understanding of your own worth.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I do think there's something with Cancer in the 5th house, you're going to have to look back at your own childhood, because the 5th house is the place of children and create, playfulness. It's that part of being a child, that beginner's mind, that like joy, that sort of unfettered joy that happens. And so anyone with this is really going to have to look back at what were the things that gave them a sensitivity around this. Like, were there struggles or hard places of things that came up? And the more that you know about that, and the more that you can self-parent, embrace those parts for healing, the more you're going to be able to be fully present and giving of yourself completely in that 5th house. And with that square to Jupiter, now is a great time to do it. Now is a great time to confront whatever those self-esteem issues that crop up, because that's how they're going to play out. And so as you work with those, you're just going to be able to kind of mature in this area of your life and be more loving and sensitive towards yourself and towards anyone outside of you that you hold in that kind of child space.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely beautiful. And the other thing is just to think about, with this being a Cancer new moon, where is the moon in your natal chart? Because that's going to tell you a lot about this sensitivity also. It's going to, the sensitivity and how you give love is going to be very different if you happen to have a natal moon in Aquarius, or if it's in Capricorn. Your way of giving love and what it is you're sensitive about will be determined a lot by the sign that your moon is in itself.
Yeah, it really just helps flesh out that story. So it's the other half of the equation.
Yeah.
So that's great.
It's good to know that. Okay, so
All right.
I think we are set, and I'm going to stop this share. And now I know you all have been waiting on pins and needles to get a really good look at my wild kitten, who is currently driving me completely crazy. And I'm sorry for the distraction, but
He's so cute.
yeah, the neighbors made it impossible for me to ignore him. So thank you, everyone. And we will be back with another video before you know it.
Thank you. Thanks, Laurie.
Ta-ta.
Bye.